Hi everyone, I'm going to be doing problem one. As of right now, nobody else has done it. So hopefully it isn't that done in the next the next couple minutes. I did go ahead and import all of my work into LaTeX just because my original work was, kind of all over the place. And, especially these first two problems, I really had to work through them and think about the coordinate frames and stuff. So it was just kind of messy. So I kind of imported the final solution onto here. So first of all, reference frames. We have some inertial reference frame N3, N1, N2 somewhere down here, right? And with that, we know that this N3 axis is going to be lined up with our A3 axis, which is over here on the base of the windmill. And that's base versus the other part that sticks out. Then we know that the angular velocity from this A frame down into N is going to be some yaw dot in the A3 direction. We're told that the whole thing can spin about this axis. Then going over to the windmill blades, I noticed that the C1 frame and the A1 frame were both fixed. Were the C1 was fixed to A1, so no matter where the system moves, C1 and A1 are always going to be aligned. So I made note of that. Also, we know that the velocity from C to A, the angular velocity is going to be this theta dot in the A1 direction because the whole system is rotating about this A1 C1 axis at some theta dot. And then from that, we know that the angular velocity to all the way from C to N down here is just going to be the sum of those two because, A to N, C, and then C to A. So we go from C to A, then A down to N. It's just that sum. Then I worked on the vector that defines the center of mass of our blade. We have some offset D in the A1 direction over here. The blade sticks out somewhat. And then it goes up in the C2 direction, some R amount, because C2 is the frame spinning with the blade. So it's always going to be some R distance away. Then I went ahead and calculated the rotational matrix to get from A to C1 or C to be able to put C all of the C vectors in their A components. And the way I did that was first, I made note of that C1 A1 relationship where they're fits. So this is just a 1 0 0. Then you just have A3 and A2, and you're trying to match this up to C2 and C3. And I just kind of the technique that helped me with this problem was just thinking about what theta does as it's at 0. So if theta's at 0, we know that cosine of 0 is going to be 1. So then we tend to say, oh, when there should be a cosine here because it'll be 100% the A2 component and then not the sine component. And there'll be no A3 component. And, same logic for C3. There's just a flip in the sign. Uh, then then I went ahead and took the R vector and put it fully in the A reference frame. So that's a dA1 R cosine A2 R sine A3. Then to actually go ahead and solve for the velocity, I used the transport theorem that we went over in these lectures. So we know that the velocity in the N reference frame is going to be equal to the time derivative of the R vector in the C frame plus the angular velocity from C all the way to N crossed with that R vector. Now, because this is a fan blade, G is fixed in space. It is not changing over time. So this term just goes to 0, and we're just left with this cross product. And I ended up just doing that using the determinant method. So we have the theta dot, the yaw dot, and then we have our R vector over here. And we all know how to take the determinant more or less. You cross one out, multiply, you end up with this, and then you have a minus here because it flips every other one. And then minus, and then and then that was able to get me the velocity vector for the system in respect to within the A frame. So I don't think this problem actually specified. It just kind of tells you to find them. So I put them in the A frame here. Obviously we have the rotational matrix. We could put them in C if need be, or any of that. Then I applied the transport theorem again to the velocity vector now to figure out what the acceleration should be. So first we have our velocity term with respect to time. We have to take the derivative of that. So what I did is I just isolated each of the components, did the derivative. There was a little bit of nuance here in, product rule, chain rule stuff. So like this yaw dot goes into yaw double dot, but then we also have to add the derivative of this component, which is the sine theta, but then because of the chain rule, we multiply it by a theta dot. We end up doing that for all three components, and we end up with too many terms. This problem had too many terms. And then ultimately what we find is that the time derivative of velocity is going to be this bit vector. Then we have to do the cross product again. Something interesting here is because we're in the A frame, I only use the cross product from A to N. So you'll notice there's no theta dot component, and that's because the velocity was already in the A frame. So I didn't need to, that had already been accounted for. So then I do the cross product similar as before. Actually, it's a little nicer because there's no A3 component because of these two zeros here. Then I went ahead and took all of this, all of that, added them up component by component, and this was the final velocity, the final acceleration that I came out to for the system. It was definitely ugly. It was a big problem, but I think I feel pretty confident about this approach. I mean, my method for finding the rotation matrix isn't great, and I definitely still need to work on that, but I believe this is my work. Thank you, and please let me know if you notice any mistakes that I made or something like that.